Well, hello, it's a fantastic day today, and I'm glad you're here with me for another episode. Today we have a special guest. We have my wife, Uta.
Hello.
And we haven't had you on the show for over a year now, right?
I think so, yeah.
That's cool to have you back again. Today we're going to talk about the future of video games. We had this discussion at the coffee table, and we thought it would be a cool idea to share this with you, our thoughts on where we see the future of video games go. And we also wanted to ask you, how do you think will the future for video games turn out? So I would say we'll just start, right?
Yeah, let's go.
So the first question is, how did video games evolve over the years? And we start with you, Uta. How do you think video games, how did you get to know video games in the past?
So yeah, well, I was born in the 80s, so obviously physical games, you know. And
this is where it all starts, with physical games. Back then we didn't have internet, right?
Yeah, right.
So you only could get into a electronics shop, a toy shop, or a department store and buy your consoles and video games.
And, you know, when I grew up, we had an Amiga, we had a Super Nintendo and a PlayStation 1, things like that. And we always had, you know, an uncle that would bring, like, video games. And or I would play I have an older brother who brought, like, video games. So I didn't buy them myself usually, but it was all physical games, basically.
I experienced it the same way. Again, like I said, back then we didn't have internet.
Yeah.
It was just consoles and video games. And the only thing that you could do is trade your games, give them to other people so they can check them out. And you bought your video games or got them for Christmas, for birthdays and stuff. So this was how we grew up with video games. And we're talking about the late 80s to 90s, mid 90s, and even late 90s, where we didn't have internet, we didn't have uploads, we weren't updating your systems, your controllers. That's something that we have nowadays.
No DLCs.
No DLCs. Yeah. The only thing that we had were expansions. Like you bought a game and then,
but Diablo,
but even Diablo 2, for instance. But even that, I would say back then they just did a sequel. You had like a game and then you had like, let's say for instance Mega Man 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is how they kind of upgraded the games with just another game where they had new features and stuff. So this is how we started experiencing video games, and this is how we grew up with video games.
And I think another important part is that the way we bought video games was also, we just went into the shop, and for me personally, I just looked at the covers and thought, you know, that looks nice, you know, because I didn't have any trailers or I didn't read video game magazines. I just went there and had a look, or maybe what if other people told me, my brother, for example, or, you know. But I wasn't like, there was no YouTube or anything like that, so you would just go in and go with your gut, basically.
I think that's a great point. We didn't have trailers and stuff like that. The only thing that we had maybe were video game magazines, where we had reviews sometimes, or just had like advertisements. But I did the same thing like you did, and I think lots of people did out there. You just chose your games by the cover most of the times back then, at least when we were kids, and so on and so forth. So that's a good point. So this is how we started getting to know video games, how we grew up with video games. Next question is, where evolved video games to now? How do video games look nowadays? And where are they standing now? What do you think, Uta?
Well, obviously, like, things change. You know, we have the internet now. When we talked about it, it sounded a bit like we grew up in the Stone Age or something, but no. But we have the internet now, so we obviously, before you buy a game, you would do your research. You would go online and check out, you know, how did all the reviews go, and look at a trailer, maybe look at the gameplay on YouTube or whatever. I personally still would always buy physical games if I can, so that hasn't changed for me at least, but you have the option now that you could buy digital or go even for streaming if you wanted to, so it has changed quite a lot. I
think the biggest point you said where that the internet changed everything. So I think with PlayStation 2 it kind of started, but then with PlayStation 3 consoles got hooked to the internet, so this meant we had updates. They started releasing games that weren't really finished and added updates to these games. We got to know DLCs, and this turned into microtransactions, and now we have all these gamble-like things that they include in games. We also have NFTs and stuff like that. So there was always controversies in video games, but in the last, I would say, maybe 10 to 15 years, a lot has changed. Not only video game wise, how the games play nowadays, but also how we consume video games. And hooking up our consoles to the internet changed a lot, I would say. And without going too much into the personal evaluation now, how do you think, compared to back in the day and now, do video games feel for you? Because back then I think it was just, like you said, you decided by a game cover, put the game in your console and you played this. And most of the times you just had this one game. So you had to spend a whole summer, maybe a whole year on this one game only. Maybe sometimes you rented this game to a friend, and he rented you something back back or you were trading or stuff like that, but you had to spend your time with the game. Nowadays it feels like it is way more fast-paced. You have like, so I see so many people online, I played 20 games already, and you have so much information, so much stuff to choose from. Back then it was way less, I would say.
Yeah.
And how do you think that, how does this feel to you, the change between back then and now?
I mean, with the introduction of the internet also came the DLCs that we already mentioned, and what I kind of feel sometimes, not always, but sometimes what you would have just unlocked during the game, like back then, now you can buy as a DLC sometimes.
Yeah.
So, for example, do you remember when we played Mortal Kombat Deception, for example? There was the crypt, and we played for hours and hours just to unlock everything, and the crypt was such a huge part of the game. And like different games as well. But I think that's sometimes missing now. I mean, sometimes some games still have that, you know, but it's sometimes
really rare.
Yeah, it feels a bit lazy sometimes that they just, you know, release half the game and just give you the rest later. For you have to pay again though, you know.
I think that is such a great point that you made there, that we have, back then we had things to unlock, new characters, new levels, secret levels, and all this kind of now turned out into paid DLC nowadays. It feels like, absolutely. I haven't had a game lately where you could unlock stuff, new characters. It's always paid DLCs or season passes is a new trend that they have.
Yeah,
they want to keep you with subscriptions, but I think we'll come to this a bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's such a great point. What I also noticed is, of course, game manuals disappeared, right? This was something, you bought a game, you were sitting in the car, you were open your game, and while you were driving home, your parents were driving, of course, and you were sitting in the back seat and you were reading the manual, and you were looking so forward to come home and try this game out. And the manuals also provided story elements and cheat codes and whatnot, or at least a telephone number we could call, and all this changed. And maybe we just mentioned streaming, because this is the next step. After all this, we now have like the Xbox Pass, it's called. We don't have an Xbox, but I think it's Xbox Pass. Now, Nintendo Switch also has like the Nintendo Switch Online, where you basically subscribe on a monthly basis and you get your video games. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it will be the future. Like, you know, it will evolve to that, and then you feel that companies want that as well. I think that's where we're headed anyways, if we want it or not. But I would still always like to have the game, actually, especially if it's a really good game that I really like. I would like to have it and play whenever I want, not when, you know, now we see, like, you know, within the last couple of months and years as well, that, you know, eShops were closing and consoles are changing and the server is not supported anymore, and then you can't play the game anymore.
Right.
So I would always like to have the game in my shelf, you know, safe, so I can play whenever I want. And I want to also, I feel like, especially with the buying digital copies, I'm not a fan of that, because you can't share as well, you know, because we have a family. I have a Switch, you have a Switch, our daughter has a Switch, and when we downloaded the DLC for Breath of the Wild,
right,
you played
only
it.
I could play it.
Yeah, I never played it because I didn't want to download it again on my Switch, and I didn't want to download it for my daughter who played it as well. But you know, that's, I feel, a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, I think they did all these things to kind of make it feel like it's easier, more available, to make it more comfortable for people to have easy access to games instantly without loading times and all that stuff. But all these perks come with a lot of downsides also that you just mentioned, and I think that's a good point. And also, I think more and more video games turn from an art form. They still are, don't get me wrong, but from art form, from like an idea somebody puts on a napkin, to a big industry. Now, let's face it, like so many other entertainment categories, video games fell victim to this whole thing. It is an industry now. We have big companies trying to make money, and they not always have the best interest in the individual. They want to make lots of money, and this is how they try to keep you with subscription services and all these little things like season passes, like we were talking about. And now, before we go to our personal evaluation, how do you think video games will look like in the future? How do you think the whole thing that we have now will turn out to be in, let's say, maybe 10 to 20 years? It's hard, but let's just play with the idea. And I would like to find out what you think.
Yeah, I definitely think that streaming will be more and more, especially, you know, because now the threshold basically is the internet, because not everybody has like perfect internet yet. But I think, you know, we will get there eventually, and then I think streaming will be the future of gaming. I personally don't like that much, but I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah. I think also the idea that you buy a console and put this underneath your television and hook it up and have a controller, this kind of idea will also disappear. I think you need a controller, right? But we also have VR, which could be more explored in the future, which we see with PlayStation, the VR2 headset that came out, or just about now, and yeah, all this kind of stuff. I think you will still have like a controller, of course, or something to control the games.
Yeah, of course.
But the box that you have, that you put a CD in or a cartridge, I feel like this will disappear in 10 to 20 years. It's like the Google Stadia thing that they had, where you just get the controller and then you have a subscription service and you can't play it anywhere on your phone and whatever. I think it's hard to predict with Nintendo because they always are so protective with their IPs, and I don't see Nintendo games being on a phone or stuff like that in the future, or that you can switch it from one to another system. But who knows? I mean, there are so much crazy stuff happened in the last couple of years. Companies buying companies, and not only in video games but also in movie. Like Disney is buying off everything, and yeah, it's hard to predict. But I think I agree with you. It will be streaming or something in that regard. Maybe even something that we don't explore at all so far. Maybe something totally new, but I think we'll go away from the physical media more and more, cartridges, CDs.
I agree.
At least for current or for next gen consoles. I don't talk about retro game is a thing that I think still will be there in 10, 20 years. Maybe it will even get bigger. What do you think?
So I think retro gaming will evolve, definitely.
Yeah.
Because we will, the current games won't be on physical media anymore, and so retro gaming will gain more and more people that have an interest in that, I think.
Right. Same like with vinyls that you see. That vinyls came back, and now you have like a big market for vinyls again. Even though people like 20 years ago said vinyls are dead.
Yeah. Even MCs are coming back,
Right.
because there's always a market for that, and I think it won't, physical games won't die out tomorrow. It will carry
slow
on. Yeah.
process.
And I think that they will, like, at least in the next 20 years, further you can't predict, I guess, but even in the next 20 years you will still have that, and it will still be available somehow,
And I feel like, to add something to that, I feel like Nintendo will be one of the last, if not the last company sticking to physical media. Like we see, like the Switch had brought back cartridges, which was so awesome. All the consoles had CDs now, and you can even see like the new consoles like the Xbox or the PlayStation 5 come with consoles that don't have a disc drive anymore. And this is a trend that will get more and more. But Nintendo has cartridges, and I feel like Nintendo tries to please new audiences and tries to cater to them, but also knows there's like a big audience there that grew with Nintendo together, that is now people who are with Nintendo for 20, 30, 40 years, and I think they kind of honor that. Okay, now let's end the video with our personal evaluation. How do we feel about how games changed and where they will go, and what do we prefer and what not? So we start with you, Uta.
Yeah, well, I feel like, it has changed, but I feel like I can still make my own choice. I can still choose to buy a physical game. I can still choose not to buy the digital copy, or, how I want to experience it. It's basically still, I have the option, so I'm fine with that, If someone else prefers digital games, they can download them, it's fine. And I think it will go more and more to streaming. I'm fine with that as well, because I think, we have a DVD collection here, for example, and we still use Netflix anyways. I see us, in the future maybe still buying physical games, but having a streaming service as well, just to try out games, maybe just to, for one evening, trying out a new like multiplayer game that we haven't played before, and use that, on the streaming service that we have a subscription for. I think they can coexist, I think. And I would be happy with that. Yeah.
I think being open-minded, open for new things always isn't a bad idea. And I have to say that I try not to get too rusty and still kind of wrap my head around new things and try to, over time, get used to them and like them. I have to say that I struggled in the last couple of years with all these things, that they got more and more rid of physical media, that more and more games came out unfinished, that more and more consoles didn't have backwards compatibility like the PlayStation. That was something that I was really sad for me personally. But I see that I'm a bit older. I play video games since the mid-80s now, and I also see that there are younger people, or kids for instance, or daughters, 8 years old, and she plays all these new games, and she's using all these new ideas that they brought up in the last couple of years. So I try to be open-minded about that, but I of course stand with physical media. I love that to, like you said, to have my own choices. I can sell them, I can trade them, I can collect them, I can look at them on my shelf. It's just something, having something tangible is really appealing to me. And digital media, now that both the Nintendo 3DS and the Wii U eShop closes, I bought some digital games. The same for the PSP. When the PSP shop closed, we filled up a whole PSP with I think 25 games so that we can play them. This is always the most important thing, just to play the games. I don't care how to play the games. And like you said, maybe the Xbox Pass doesn't sound like a bad idea. We don't have an Xbox. Same with the Nintendo subscription service. I don't personally like it. I don't use it, but I see us in the future using it more and more because it is the thing then to use. And everything has positives and negatives, and sitting there and trying out games and just spending €6 a month doesn't sound like a bad idea. But yeah, I think it still is in its infancy, like you mentioned, because of internet. It's not that great all over the world. But I think that's it. We had a great discussion here. Again, to throw the question to you, how do you think video games evolve? Do you like it or not, where we're standing now? And especially, how do you think video games will look like in the future? I mean, I can't wait to find out what the next Nintendo console will be.
Oh, yeah.
I really hope it won't be like a Switch 2.
We had hours and hours of discussions about what the Nintendo console will look like in the future.
Right.
So,
maybe that's something for another episode.
Maybe, yeah.
But my hopes actually are with Nintendo, because they are kind of catering to nostalgia a little bit more and using more of an old school kind of system. They also have the newer things. Lots of people are complaining, which I never get, because I think Nintendo is doing a great thing there so far, in my opinion. They are making both sides happy. So yeah, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, we hope you have a fantastic day, and I see you in the next episode. And I hope Uta will join us some more here on the channel.
Maybe I will.
Thanks for being here. Bye bye.